Thanks, Sandy, and thanks everyone for having us here. It's great to be in Switzerland. I'm sure you appreciate us bringing the rain with us from the UK. So my name's David Rogers. I'm the Fraud and Security Group Chair at GSMA, and it's basically the operator association for the mobile industry. So globally, they represent the mobile industry. And we have a very, very active fraud and security group, which comprises of probably about 2,500 security leaders. And then all that information then flows down into their companies. So mobile network operators, operating system companies, vendors. You can imagine that the number of companies we have involved, and obviously the number of types of issue that we have to deal with. It's massively grown. So we're going to talk to you about that. I'll do a quick introduction of myself, and then I'll let Roger speak. So I own a company called Copper Horse. We do a lot of IoT security stuff and automotive and mobile related stuff, obviously. I'm also the author of the UK's Code of Practice for IoT Security, which is now passed into law in the UK under something called the PSTI Act, which also makes vulnerability disclosure law in the UK, which is cool. And that's now an ETSI EN 303645, a sort of baseline for IoT security. So that's pretty cool. I also do sim racing and hack cars, so come and talk to me later if you want about that. And I grow grapevines, so being in a country like Switzerland is always good for me. So over to you, Roger.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My profile's not quite as interesting as David's, I'm afraid. I've worked at the GSMA for 8 years. I've coordinated across several working groups, which are kind of like the engine rooms of the industry, where people come and collaborate, write white papers together, and push the industry forward. I oversee a couple of things at the moment. One is the security accreditation scheme, and that's where we send auditors to eSIM and SIM factories, and they assess how secure their processes are, which is great for the operators and saves them having to do it themselves. And then I also do CVD, which is Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Thanks, Roger. Okay, so, I mean, it's also an honour to follow Axel on, as a great speaker and also a great reverse engineer. So it's great to be amongst such fantastic company. So what I find with mobile security is actually it's kind of largely hidden. So most people in the cybersecurity space are in the traditional IP world, and they kind of understand how that operates. But the mobile world has really been quite closed. But it's not like we haven't suffered any issues, but it's also not like we've sat there doing nothing either. So we spent a lot of time really sort of fighting against. So my background is in the embedded systems hacking community, and fighting against some of the reverse engineering that went on in those days, against Symlock and IMEI. But we have like so many different types of issue. Obviously, telephony is interesting for a lot of people. So, you know, this broad range of technologies. If you think back to, say, the late 90s, you know, we were dealing with devices that barely had SMS working on them. You know, the types of frauds that we were dealing with were premium rate calling, maybe, and some kind of subscription fraud. And now if you think mobile phones are the center of everybody's lives around the world. So what that means is the threat landscape massively changes. And so we have to deal with everyone from organized criminals to intelligence agencies to people trying to break into people's bank accounts, all trying to target the device and the networks on which that operates on. And of course, as we grow, we're becoming closer to an all IP world. And so the crossover between telephony and the traditional computing space is very, very blurred now. And so this is part of why we're here as well, is to try to explain that, you know, this isn't this kind of alien world, that we are adopting the good practices from the IT world as well. And so there have been a lot of advocates within the GSMA for things like coordinated vulnerability disclosure. So yeah, we also have like most of this is public, I think, but we've had some pretty epic hacks as well, that have either been facilitated through the mobile network. So if you think about Charlie Miller, for example, and Chris Valasek, when they drove the Jeep off the highway, that was facilitated by a mobile network flaw. And of course, we're constantly fighting against people who want to make money. And obviously there's billing in telephony. So that's a kind of issue for us. So that whole threat landscape and the attack surface is absolutely massive. You can see here some examples. So actually this is the blue box, which was, Steve Wozniak's and Steve Jobs' piece of kit there, for making long distance phone calls. The first piece of malware on Symbian, which was Kabir, a lot of SIM unlocking equipment, and then of course voicemail hacking, and then things like bulk theft from transit is a big issue for not just this industry but many others. But mobile phones are extremely expensive. So, and you might have seen recently some use of SIM boxes in places like Ukraine, for lots of different mechanisms. So adopting, tools from the fraud space into providing, for example, sort of spying capabilities. So the one thing is this space isn't, is super interesting. One day is never different, never the same, sorry. So, okay, so in the past, how did we handle disclosures, and what happened if somebody dropped an O-Day at a conference? Well, it was quite ad hoc. It was people coming up to me because they knew that I worked in the mobile industry and saying, "Oh, do you know about this?" Or "Can I have a contact at Nokia?" or whatever. And of course, that's kind of like, really unsustainable. It's certainly unsustainable in 2023. You cannot have a situation where, that very, very serious issues are relying on personal contacts. There's inevitably delays that occur when you rely on sort of networks like that. And they'll still exist, but we need more formal ways for dealing with these things. Of course, we've always shared intelligence in the industry, and that's the purpose of our sort of quarterly meetings. It's the main focus of those meetings. But you can't wait 3 months for a major issue to be dealt with or even communicated to the industry. That just is completely unacceptable. And then, whether people contact me through my blog or contact me through emails, again, it's just too much lag. So, that's where we've come from. And that's really why, a few of us felt that we should, look at, having some kind of way of dealing with disclosures in a proper manner. And of course, during this time, so over the past 20 years, vulnerability disclosure as an accepted mechanism for dealing with security research, at least in the hacking community, has solidified. So we've come from the days of people offering up different methods of disclosure, from Rainforest Puppy to others, to Katie Missouri, to actually having a pair of ISO standards now, and best practice advice from NIST and ETSI and others. So we do have a tool to be able to do this. But one of the tipping points for me was in 2010. So there was a talk at CCC from Colin Mulliner and Nico Gold, both great researchers. And essentially, they'd gone and informed all the mobile manufacturers of this particular issue, but nobody else in the industry knew about it, and they didn't talk to each other. It's absolutely crazy. So we had this, and I'm sure you've all had similar experiences. So we proposed to the industry to adopt vulnerability disclosures and mechanism for dealing with these things. And it took ages, to be honest. People didn't understand this thing. You get the old sort of comment of, we shouldn't be talking to the hackers. And so it took a while for us to get to the point where actually we decided that we'd have a cross-industry scheme. Because what we recognized was, with hundreds of member companies, that not everybody would be able to get a contact at a company. And in some cases, some of the researchers didn't really want to have that successfully disclosed to a company either, because they wanted to drop an O-Day. So we're pretty much the only industry in the world that, and because of the way that we're organized, actually, we're only really probably one of the few capable industries where we do communicate really, really closely together, that has this cross-industry CVD scheme. And we're now up to 77 published and acknowledged disclosures since 2017, which has saved millions and millions of dollars, euros and pounds for the industry and protected millions of subscribers worldwide. So Roger's going to take us through the benefits and scope.
Yep. So what are the benefits for the industry and consumers? So we have kind of four major benefits. One is kind of early, it enables early notification of vulnerabilities, so the people affected know as soon as possible, which provides time to respond and remediate vulnerabilities before they become public. And then trustworthy, which is a really important one, enables trustworthy communication between researchers and impacted organizations, which is important. Without this program, researchers would need to reach out to each and every company that it affected. And it would take time to build trust between those parties. This CVD program effectively filters stuff coming through, gets reviewed by 25 industry experts, and if they agree that action is required, then the industry listens. So it is a lot quicker getting to the problem, and overall, it improves security awareness and readiness. All right. So what is in scope for our program? So firstly, it needs to be unique. But by unique, I don't mean revolutionary. We do accept slight twists on previously well-known cases. Basically, all vulnerabilities are welcome to the scheme. Next, if it's vendor specific, if someone brings a vulnerability to us that's vendor specific, we would ask them to go directly to that company. That's probably the better way of dealing with it. If you're having trouble reaching out to that company, you can come and contact us and we'll help you with that. But that's normally the best way of doing it. And finally, your vulnerabilities should be focused on open standards based technologies, telco focused. So examples are kind of the networks, SS7, SIM, authentication, that sort of stuff. So if you've got research, we'd love to hear from you. All right. So if you are a researcher, are there any other options to you in the telco industry? There are other options. So firstly, as I mentioned just now, vendor-specific vulnerability. So, Samsung, Google, they all have these CVD programs, so you can take your stuff to there directly. But if you can't reach out to them, come to us and we can help you speak to them. Secondly is standard-specific vulnerabilities. So we've got Etsy and 3GPP, and they have their own CVD programs. There are two potential issues for researchers with reaching out to 3GPP, though. That is that their program's not private. So there's hundreds of members there that are involved in that work, whereas ours, to start off with, is only 25 individual panelists. So we can keep it nice and private, and then both the researcher and the panel agree when we can go public with it. Once we've got all the facts and once we've got remedies and fixes in place. So it's nice timing that way. And then the other problem with reaching out to a 3GPP for some researchers is they may not know which standard it is that their vulnerability affects. So bring it to us, we can assess it, and then we can go and send a liaison statement to 3GPP. But you can use these other CVD programs. Okay, so this is the 2023 squad photo of the panel of experts. They are world-leading experts across the industry. We've got operators in there. We've got handset makers, all sorts across across the world. So we've got AT&T in America, we've got NTT Docomo in Japan, we've got European Swisscom are in there, and then we've got vendors, Ericsson, Nokia, those sort of people, and it's the cream of the crop. Very very well established experts of the field. So how do you become a panelist if you are interested? Basically, we recruit every 2 years, and you would sign up to a 2-year voluntary agreement. Applicants just fill out applications. They must have strong referees, people who back them as experts. And then, they must be able to share with us real world and or standards governance experience in topics such as core network technology, RAN, signaling, that sort of thing. When we do the recruitment, we then assess each application against the other people trying to get on the panel. Also, people in the panel can reapply, so we'll assess them all against each other. We tend to try and come out with sort of 24, 25 members, which is a nice kind of figure to manage the group. At times, we will actively headhunt people from certain areas. So the last recruitment drive, we realised that SIM we're a little low on expertise there. So we reached out and we found people from Apple, IDEMIA, and Geosec and Devrient. Aim is to have a nice spread of experts in all areas. Once a panelist's 2-year ends, they can reapply, as I said earlier. If you are interested, please reach out. We're always looking out for people. There's a two-year cycle next October, but we are always looking on ad hoc. If someone drops out of the group, we like to keep numbers up. All right, so just quickly look at the environment that we're working in here. So there's the GSMA CVD advisory panel of experts. Who do we reach out to? Who do we interact with when we have a CVD case? So firstly, it's the GSMA working groups, as I mentioned earlier. They are, the kind of work engine of the industry, with people collaborating, working on stuff and having events, meetings, all that sort of stuff. So if something affects one of the standards or requirements in any of the working groups that they manage, we would reach out to them and we would get fixes, changes to those documents to make them more tight. Once a case is finished, if required, we could get the researcher to present an FASG meeting. But we are heavily involved in the working groups. As mentioned earlier, standards bodies, 3GPP, ETSI. If we realise that one of the vulnerabilities affects one of their documents, we'll be in contact with them with a liaison statement, and then we'll keep in contact as they make changes. Finally, other. Telecom industry events, stuff like today, reaching out to you guys, just advocating the scheme to you. Hopefully, people in the industry and researchers here today realise the benefits and keep bringing stuff to us, basically. Academia there is really important. 80% of our research comes from universities. We want to hear from you if you've got research. Final little box there, bottom left, is TISAC. That's just one of the other GSMA reactions to security. That is the Information Sharing and Analysis Centre. That's run by one of my colleagues, Leonie Lewis. It's the central hub of information sharing for the telecoms industry. It's essentially where companies share information on cyber attacks. So things that are actually happening, rather than we're a little bit further on the timeline, I guess. Basically it's a really good way of sharing stuff so that other companies can learn from issues. That is the environment. I'll hand back over to David.
Okay, so I'm going to talk you through a few of the CVDs that we've handled and that have become public domain. Obviously, as I mentioned, there are 77 of these, and you can look them up. The various different academic papers and conferences that they've been presented at. So starting off with Ghost Telephonist. So this is actually the first CVD that we received from Unicorn team. And it's actually so the ones that I've picked out to try to illustrate the types of issues that we see. And this is a good example of a generational vulnerability. So uniquely to the mobile industry, we kind of have to keep all of this legacy back to the 1980s. And it's what I call the Janus problem that we have. So we're having to look back and deal with all the legacy whilst also trying to design all the stuff for the future as well. So when we make generational changes in mobility, we're able to fix some of the structural issues. So for example, from 2G up to 3G, we were able to introduce mutual authentication and so on and so on. And we've gradually been able to make those big step changes. But because all of the devices and the networks essentially allow for a rollback to legacy generation like 2G, that often leaves some of the newer devices exposed to older problems, and it's a continual challenge that we have. And the only thing that's going to solve this in some cases is obviously 2G, 3G turn down, so turning off those networks and moving on. But realistically, we know that 2G is going to be around for quite a while. So in this case, it's quite a good example. So this is a circuit switch fallback. So basically moving from packet switch to circuit switch. So all that legacy technology and opening up, unfortunately, a lot of complexity and vulnerabilities. And so we're then having to tolerate the insecurities of those older protocols. So what we also find for academic researchers particularly, but obviously for auditors and criminals, is that SMS is often a target as well. So because of the rise of SMS 2FA, those legacy issues are really often targeted against intercepting SMS 2FA messages. So in this case, there is an attack where the victim was completely unaware and they didn't need to have a full space station to do it. So the question is really with this one as well, I think, and with a lot of the submissions that we get, is the practicalities of these attacks. And so often the CVD panel is kind of weighing up those sort of risk-based things, which is this really likely? And it's a very, very difficult task to do because obviously, you don't always have the context in which an attack will take place, and you're having to make a judgment on that. So in this case, you have to be near the victim and so on. So what we often have is a conversation sort of back and forth in good faith as to things that we might not have considered or that the researchers might not have considered. And I think that works quite well. Because in a lot of cases, these things are theoretical. It's very rare that we see stuff in the wild, actually, and I'll show you some examples next. So what we often see also is a lot of configuration mistakes. And there was a good talk at DEF CON actually recently about configuration issues in mobile networks across the world. So in this case, and by the way, these particular researchers, David Ruprecht and Merlin and Torsten and so on, Christina, have done an immense amount of good work for our industry, actually. So this was presented at WISEC, which is a great conference, by the way, on mobile. And it looked at insecure LTE network configurations. And, when you see this kind of stuff, you're just like, why? Like what led you to these decisions? Like how did you get into that situation? It is quite frightening. So what happened was that there were immediate mitigations by the mobile network operators, and we also tightened up the standards in 3GPP to prevent that kind of situation where people accidentally misconfigure. So I think that the other thing that also demonstrates that in this case, these guys had access to a network to be able to do stuff. And in most cases, security researchers don't have access to a network because it would be illegal for them to touch it in pretty much every country in the world. So by working together with network operators and the network operators working together with universities and researchers, then giving that access, it really helps research, security research move forward. And I think there's some countries that are thinking towards having sort of cyber ranges for mobile. And I think that's a really good idea in allowing security researchers to come and play around with network equipment. I mean, if you think about, why we don't want to give people live access to mobile networks. There was one case, it's quite an infamous case, where a pen tester was doing work on a network in one country on a live network and took out the entirety of another country's mobile network. So yeah, we don't really want to do that. But in this case as well, the researchers also created an open tool for network operators to use. And so they were able to pass that around to them. We were able to get the word out quickly. We told the network operators to get their configuration sorted out. And of course, we tightened up the standards as well. So I think that was like a kind of generally positive outcome. And that's pretty much exactly what this is designed to do, that we all work together. This one's really interesting because this is one that we did find in the wild. It's called SimJacker. And this is quite similar to some earlier attacks that we saw in 2013 around binary SMS and silent SMS stuff. Now, a lot of people don't realize that basically the SIM card that they're using in their device or their eSIM essentially contains an execution environment. So it's basically based around Java, and there's lots of functionalities there. And the SIM Alliance had defined something called the SAT browser. It was on quite a few manufacturers' SIM cards, and it allowed execution of stuff from the SIM toolkit, which then told the phone to do things. And amazingly, that also included opening a browser and going to a URI, which is something else, really. So obviously, this when this was discovered by bad actors. And we think in this case, we looked at it and it was Adaptive Mobile saw this being actively exploited in Latin and South America. We don't exactly know who was doing it, but it looked to us to be the kind of profile of sort of private spyware actors. And so, obviously this type of vulnerability, it gives them really quite a lot of power to execute spyware. So the GSMA worked with the SIM Alliance to sort out the security specs, but specifically we worked to turn off the SAT browser remotely in the SIM card, which was a godsend for us, really. And in some cases there were SIM card replacements. But again, this is another example of us being able to get all the stakeholders together to deal with the issue. But this is a very interesting write-up if you want to have a look at the SimJacker website. So another legacy problem that we have is around legacy encryption algorithms. So if you remember that GSM was designed in the 1980s, there were all sorts of government controls. Most of the telcos were nationalized. They weren't private companies. And so what we find is that, particularly in the radio path between the phone and the base station, those issues crop up from time to time. So one of the problems, as I said before, is in GSM is a lack of mutual authentication. So, and remember that we came from no encryption before that on the air interface. So, that was a big step change at that point. But this technology is still available now. And so people have heard of stingrays and false base stations. They're really taking advantage of that issue of the lack of mutual authentication. Because back in the day, the network was automatically trusted because it was run by the state-owned operator. Obviously, I can see people smiling now that that kind of feels ridiculous now. But in the 1980s and 70s, that was the kind of thinking. Obviously, if you can pull down a device to communicate on those older protocols and the older radios, then you can really target those specific encryption algorithms, and you can brute force them and break into them really quickly, in theory. So that's exactly what happened here. And now, so the network operators were able to survey their risk in their networks, and also none of the handsets should have been. None of the manufacturers should have been producing these devices that had these older algorithms anyway. The standards bodies had said that they wanted to phase them out. And if we look at like what should be in place, which is GEA3, well, that was defined in 2002. So we do have a structural issue in the mobile industry, which is related to crypto agility, which is deploying upgrades to algorithms is a problem. And it shouldn't be a problem. And I think that will go away in the future. Networks should be on GEA4 now, but because of the key lengths, there are requirements for other interfaces to change. So there's a lot of quite a lot of network equipment upgrade that needs to go on. And you can imagine that the network operators are reluctant to do that. But we were able to push out GEA1 removal by remote upgrade to the firmware and devices, which again, 20 years ago, we never had that capability. And of course, this doesn't affect 4G and 5G directly. So if you're on LTE networks and you haven't got a GSM or UMTS network available, then it's not going to affect those devices or 5G. So, this lack of crypto agility is what's been compounding our legacy issues and what allows those sorts of things to continue. So I'll just touch on a couple of other interesting ones here. This particular issue demonstrates where researchers are operating within a confined environment. So these were Chinese security researchers, and they looked at the issues on one particular network. And we looked at these problems and actually, the issues around IP spoofing and so on. And they referenced two TCP attacks. So one was a side channel attack and the other one was blind in window attacks, which is actually an RFC for fixing. But actually we looked at it and it's like, this isn't a problem with the mobile network. This is actually about the server configuration. And so this wasn't a problem essentially with RCS or 5G. There were also a lot of prerequisites for the attack. Now, we did accept the CVD on the basis that we wanted to recommend that people actually correctly configure their servers again. But it was kind of, I felt a little bit out of the scope of what we should be looking at. And if they tested it on other networks, they would have found the issue. This one was essentially a collusion attack. Now this is quite interesting. So in the sense that, when we defined 4G, we wanted to tighten up the way that, authentication worked. So we want to create like a tighter binding between the home network and the subscriber. So you don't really want a roaming partner to be easily attacking, from another country, a subscriber that's in one particular country. So we did a bunch of things, and what happened here in this particular attack is that the attacker also has access to a trusted partner, in the case of what we would call an IPX provider. So they can grab the authentication vectors legitimately, but then feed them to a local IMSI catcher and basically have a successful attack. So an in-country local attack combined with a remote attack. So it's quite a kind of worrying one. You can see there's sort of potential for spying attacks and so on. And we already had the countermeasures defined, but we did tighten up things like, mass requests of PLMN IDs and things like that. So super interesting. And again, I think if we look at how that could have manifested itself in the market, that could have been really a big privacy breach for subscribers. So finally, just talk about some from this year. And this really shows actually how we're getting ahead of stuff. So this is where I want to be. So finding issues. So network slicing is something that we want to deploy in 5G networks. 5G standalone networks are not really massively deployed yet. And these vulnerabilities were submitted. They were mainly around OAuth 2. So we were able to fix those. We were able to liaise with 3GPP on that. And so we're getting ahead of the technology and fixing the issues before the technology comes to market. So that's amazing, really, and we're saving the industry a lot of cost as well. And it highlights some issues around standards as well that maybe in the future we will kind of solve with some kind of AI, because what you see is a lot of these types of issues are caused by non-determinism. So when we're writing the specs and stuff, people concentrate on the main use cases and they don't think about bits around the edge and where, I probably used the wrong term, edge there, but around the sort of boundary cases, but they're the places that could be exploited. So it's a real benefit to us that researchers are able to help us with that.
Looking at the time, I will power through these ones. This isn't a great slide. I don't really like it either. It's very busy. Basically, we have a process flow. Submission comes in, I review it, and then if it's not obviously out of scope,
they don't want to hear that.
All right, let's move on.
There's a process.
All right. Acknowledgements. If your CVD is in scope and you've done everything you should do, then we acknowledge you and you go up on this board here. It's on the GSMA website. Researchers from across the globe, look at the different universities there. It's very diverse. 80% are from universities, so big stakeholders, academia. CVD versus CVE is a bit of some people find that confusing. CVD is just a number. We're not acknowledging you. If you get on here, you're acknowledged, but you'll notice that I think 68 is not on there, so that wasn't acknowledged. So there is a difference between CVD and CVE. Stat slide. I'm not going to go into this. We'll hand out the slides right at the end, and they can have a look if they want. But it just shows how many submissions we've got this year, different types of technologies, outputs to GSMA members, standards, bodies, engagements, that sort of thing. Then there we go. All-time dashboard. So 78 since 2017. How many days we've taken on average per case? We try and do it in 90. We tend to be below that, which is good. Some cases do go longer though. Different technology types. It kind of matches the 1 year map really. Different amounts of standards, bodies, engagement, that sort of thing. Okay. Yeah.
I need to get our act together, don't we? So sort of summarize really what the sort of common themes we see in these CVD submissions. Obviously network operator configuration issues, when stuff goes into service, those fallback and bidding down attacks to legacy technologies, legacy protocol abuse. So, you might have heard around the signaling network, SS7 and diameter. These are really, really structural, difficult problems to solve. And they do get abused. And we spend a lot of our time trying to create workarounds and fixes and firewalls for these types of things. The undefined behavior in standards that I just mentioned. And then, abuse of trust. So I guess this is the kind of zero trust argument essentially. But the way that networks were set up to interconnect relies on implicit trust, and that's not good enough. And we've suffered the pain of that for many, many years. But again, it's very difficult to structurally change the mobile industry to manage that issue. And bear in mind the sheer number of organizations that we're having to deal with is very, very difficult to manage. And when you potentially might have a malicious insider that works in one of those organizations as well, having that trusted access is a concern. So the scheme that we've presented provides this easy access for operators, easy access for researchers for validation of their research across the world. And I would encourage you, even if you think that it's not relevant, or they wouldn't be interested, don't think like that. We're always open. You can speak to Roger. We're always open to accepting research, and questions, or if you need to find a company, that we're providing that open door really to the security research community. So what next? Well, we're on this, we have this Janus problem that we're kind of dealing with. And we've really been blown away by some really stunning research work, not just submitted to us, but we're looking at all the mobile stuff that's out there. Of course, we still have a massively long way to go. We've got all these kind of industry verticals, everything from medical to industrial, and of course, as you've probably seen in some of the conflicts around the world, it's pretty much no holds barred when it comes to attacking this stuff. There's a bunch of cybersecurity legislation out there and things like secure by designs. They're all positives. They all help us collectively to get to where we need to be. And if you look at what security we have in 5G and 5G standalone, it's pretty impressive. But of course, we'll always carry this legacy. So eventually 4G will be legacy. Eventually 5G will be legacy. So we need to get better at managing that and just accept that legacy will always be an issue. But my one concern is that at some point we'll have to logically break with the past. We can't continually support